You're at the Coaching Inn, 3D Coaching's virtual pub, where we enjoy conversations with people who are engaged in the world of coaching.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Coaching Inn. I'm your host, Claire Pedrick, and today my guest is Chris Hewitt. I'm going to ask Chris to introduce himself in a minute, but first of all, just a reminder, if you subscribe or follow the Coaching Inn on your favourite podcast platform, you'll get every new episode as they drop. Plug over. Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Hello. Lovely to meet you and real privilege to be on this podcast.
Well, you came to the Coaching Inn because one of my colleagues met you and said you must interview Chris at the Coaching Inn. So your LinkedIn profile made me smile. It says you're a business and personal coach. Tell me your actual journey.
Crikey. I think the journey to coaching is best started probably 10 years ago. And at that point, I was chief exec of a trade association, local trade association. And it was a trade association for general medical practitioners, GPs in county in the Midlands. And it was, I suppose I'd been a burnt out GP. I'd burnt out as a GP about 5 years before, and I'd had about 6 jobs in that 5 years before becoming a chief executive. I was really stumbling around what to do. And I met a guy who was reviewing our local hospitals and care systems, and he was looking at the emergency care pathway. And he was a real guru, and he was spending 3 months in the area interviewing nurses and patients and doctors and all sorts. And he wrote his report, and it was brutal. It was kind of saying loads of things in the system were broken, loads of processes were broken, but he also described broken people, and the phrase he used was loads of good people working really hard with a sense of learnt helplessness and learnt hopelessness. And I just thought, wow, he's saying really powerful things. I don't understand these things. And I knew that feeling, but I didn't know what it was. I got my head around burnout in the previous 5 years and done research and postgraduate studies on burnout, and finally realised what had happened to me. But I didn't understand why within a system that we need, we weren't supporting people, we weren't helping them with basics, but also with supervision, coaching, mentoring, all these things that I had started to enjoy as chief exec of this trade association. And so I started to roll out various offers for members of the trade association, coaching offers, mentoring offers, etc. And there was a lot of resistance to it from a lot of people who were damaged from wanting to rescue and fix and mend, wanted to be a mentor, wanted to be a coach, wanted to fix and mend, but weren't really taking it on for themselves. And I just couldn't get my head around it. And I still didn't really know what learned hopelessness and learned helplessness meant at that point. And I came across a very experienced coach. I was recommended to meet with her, Kim Morgan, and I had a fantastic conversation, really, really powerful conversation. One of those conversations you think, wow, that was when I thought, right, I'm going to go this way instead. I'm going to take this road. Kim shared a book she'd written, the coach's casebook, it was called. It was about different traits that hold us back. And she ran a course allied with Chester University. So it was a really good course with International Coaching Federation accreditation. And I just loved it. The course was fantastic. People from all sorts of backgrounds, people from different stages in life. And I just thought, oh, I've met my tribe. This is fantastic. Finally, all these years later. And I began to start being really interested in the kind of things like learned hopelessness and drama triangles and the games people play and all these sort of things. And during my own coaching, I'd had, various coaches, various experiences of profiling and MBTIs, Myers-Briggs, and colour insights and all sort of thing. But I was always struggling to think, there's all these tools and it's all too hard and I'm never going to be good enough. And, as a doctor, you get lots of certificates and you diagnose things and you get appraised and you get monitored and you think, right, I can do this now. I think I've had all these decades of training. As a coach, I never felt good enough. And I think your books, the prequel, The Human Behind the Coach, and the course, you mentioned your colleague, very kindly recommend. I might be good to interview. Sue Blanche ran a facilitator course for action learning sets with 3D, and it was that was mind blowing as well. That was like that first coaching course. It was just really empowering and a real reboot. To sort of say, keep it simple, stop, don't just to learn to listen, learn to focus, learn to be with people, to serve them. I think that, as my background and a lot of the dysfunction and perhaps the cause of my own burnout was this drive to fix and to mend and to strive and do good and all that. Whereas just being and just listening and just serving just felt so much more sustainable and more powerful, because rather than saying, here's your diagnosis, here's your treatment, do this, do that, don't come back unless you absolutely need to. That's very different to how can I serve you? Or, I don't need to listen to understand you, but if you want to listen to understand yourself, then I can be a sounding board and be that person on the back of the, a bike as a stoker, sort of pushing you when the hills getting tough, as opposed to thinking I've always got to be steering, I've got to be the one driving, even if I've got passengers, get on board and I'll drive you somewhere. It was good. It was a bumpy ride in my first career, but my other thing, coaching is the thing that really brings me joy. I find it really, really powerful.
You remind me as you're talking, Chris, of something that the doctor Rachel Remen said, the palliative care doctor.
Oh yeah.
She said something like, to fix and to serve is to see other people as weak. And to create a distance, this isn't quite right. You cannot serve at a distance. You can only serve that to which you are profoundly connected.
I was reminded of a quote by her just the other day. It's, when you help, you see life as weak. When you fix, you see life as broken. When you serve, you see life as whole. So this idea that it's more from you, it's more from your soul. I think that serving, and I think one of the things with a lot of nurse training, midwife training, doctor training, dentist training is it's often in a medical model of something's broken, go out there and fix things. Whereas serving is much more nuanced, but much more satisfying somehow. And I think noticing and serving is the bit that chimes from the work you share on this podcast and in your book. I find that much more powerful as working as a coach, and to know I can use and access tools is great, but actually just sitting back and saying, right, the best way to serve this person is just to listen to them and find out what they need to talk about.
Because there's nothing more extraordinary, is there, than feeling truly heard. I made a little note in my diary the other day, and it said, they are heard, they feel heard, they are and feel deeply heard. And I was just thinking that there are different levels to how heard we feel, aren't there, depending on how attentive the other person is to us.
I think so. And I think that's one of the challenges in the world we live in, is that there's so much noise and things for our attention, and the norm is to transmit now. I think I'm not saying that may have always been the way, but we've lost some of the old-fashioned etiquette of taking it in turns and saying, listening for the answer when we say, "How are you? How are your children? How's the family? How's your job?" It's very much our profile and what we say and how many likes we've had or whatever, and that means I think there's a lot of fear and isolation out there because people don't feel anyone's listening or really getting a sense of their feelings and what they're going through as an individual. And I think that's why, there's a great need for therapists and for coaches. People need to reflect on how they got to where they are, but also looking forward. That I think they don't know who to talk to, and often, and I don't think people understand what good coaching can be like. And I think that sense of being heard when you've had really, really powerful coaching, really powerful supervision is very hard to explain to someone, but it lands somewhere very deep. That being heard, I think.
Yeah. So many ways to go. Can we just pick up that thing that you said about learned helplessness and learned hopelessness? I was in conversation with somebody yesterday, and we were talking about the fact that often in organisations there are organisational cultures where people have learnt to not to learn, and where coaching is a tricky intervention, because when you ask somebody what they'd like to think about, they don't know, because they've not been invited to think at work for a very long time, if ever.
I think so. I think I don't think many of our organisations are learning organisations, and I think a lot of our organisations want compliance and productivity, and there's a group think, whether you're at the top board level, director of finance or chief exec, or whether you're down at floor level, at the front desk or answering the phone or mopping the floor, whatever. I think there is you comply, you're productive, and you don't complain, and that means lots of opportunities are missed by the organisation to learn and say, how can we improve this? We keep making the same mistakes and get the same complaints from people using our service or our organisation, but people on the ground know the answers and we're not listening to them. And I think if you're not listened to, you just lose the muscles, and you get on with your day job, clock on, clock off, and gradually, no matter how bright and well-meaning and hard-working you are, you just think, this is how the message the organisation gives is, this is how we do things around here. Get on with it or find somewhere else, I think, which is brutal. And it means coaching, I think, certainly in the world I've been in health, coaching has tended to be for people who are failing or for people who are leading, and not much in between.
Yeah.
So we'll do coaching to you because you basically need remediation, and we'll just call it coaching. And you need to conform more and stop or perform more productively. Or at the top, you're a leader, so we're going to, as part of your package and your perks, we'll give you some coaching as well. So there isn't a culture all through the organisation of, right, okay, we're going to give you genuine supervision, mentoring, coaching, or make it accessible to you, and then build those muscles up to encourage you to speak. I mean, action learning sets, when you get a group of peers or people speaking, there's permission, or there should be permission in the organisation that commissions action learning sets to say, we want to hear the outputs from your group, because the learning for you as individuals are going to be learning for us and for our customers and for our board and everything else. And that needs organisations to wake up and say, right, are we genuinely a learning organisation? Are we interested in being a coaching organisation? Or are we just looking at spreadsheets and financial reports and our bonuses at the end of the year? That's brutal, but that's the kind of boards I've sat on.
Yeah. Yeah, and it requires people to be released to be in them, doesn't it? So we just won a Health Service Journal Award for the Action Learning Set work that is a very tiny part of a talent management support network in the UK for global majority nurses, midwives, and
I did see that. It was fantastic. I was really, really, it made me feel warm, because having done the course with Sue Blanche, I saw that on LinkedIn and in the Health Service Journal. I thought, this is good. This is people are starting to accept the benefits of action learning sets and coaching and all sorts. And I was, in fact, after as a side issue, it made me think, oh, here's another phrase I don't know. Global majority. I saw that when you won the award, and I thought, I don't actually know what that phrase means. And I read it up, and I looked back, and I did the etymology and find out who claims to have invented that phrase. And I thought, you know what, this is good, because every day you wake up, you see something new, and then you think, cracky, I didn't know that. Right, that's something, I now will put in my toolkit. We all want to make sure we're saying the right things and using the right terminology, but I get global majority. I think I work with a lot of people from the global majority, and I now, understanding our own privilege, but then making sure we start to get up to date and up to speed with the semantics and terminology, I think is important. So so it's very useful in that sense as well, you winning that prize. Thank you.
The thing that's interesting though about that, Chris, is that project happened under the radar.
Right.
And one of the challenges was band 4, so quite junior nurses,
right,
being able to be released to be part of the action learning set. But the most, there were so many exciting things when they did the research at the end of the project, and we truly only did a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of this. We trained the facilitators. Everything else was done by volunteers. But what was happening was a senior nurse, so a chief nurse in one trust, was facilitating an action learning set of people from all over the place. And that chief nurse was hearing stories of very junior staff that would never have been heard in their own organisation, because it would have been filtered all the way up.
Yeah.
And so they were hearing real stories, and these junior staff were feeling really, truly heard by a senior person. But it wasn't in the same bit of the organisational system.
Right.
But the stories were still being heard, which was extraordinary. Really, really extraordinary.
I've just come through a transition with my role at NHS England, and we've merged the educator work into NHS England, and there's been a lot of challenges, and I was in a group that was being facilitated to say, how do you cope with the change and the impacts on you and your teams and you individually and your psychology. And then we've decided we're going to launch action learning sets amongst ourselves. So again, there's chief nurses and various chiefs in the NHS are saying, right, action learning, where do we get it? How do we get the facilitators? So it's starting to spread. And I think, you winning that HSJ award, it just raises the profile again, of yes, what happened to action learning sets? Why does no one do them anymore? So I think people are starting to wake up and say, some things just aren't working. We can't just keep looking at spreadsheets and targets and measuring things. If we measure things, we get what we measure. We don't get what people want. And I think you get what people want by listening and genuinely engaging with patients, carers, people at band 4, people at band 3. It's not about the chief exec's report.
And organisations go through, so the health service goes through phases of using action learning. And I've had years ago, when we tried to introduce it in a hospital, this was more than 20 years ago, we had to change the name of it because there was a belief in the concept, but there'd been some really bad experiences where it hadn't been about learning, it had been about fixing and telling.
Right.
And therefore, to introduce it, it had to be described in a different way so that people felt safe enough? Because all of this is about safety, isn't it? Everything that you've described in this conversation is about people feeling heard and feeling safe.
Yeah,
enough.
100%. And it's so sad that things are, you know, I described attempts to fix and remediate people who are seen as not doing their job well enough is sometimes called coaching, and then the coach, you know, the coaches who are tendering for the work are basically being told, right, we want you to sort out these people, and these are the messages that, you know, they need to align to our objectives as an organization and get it, you know, or they need to be persuaded they need to find somewhere else to be a troublemaker. And it's such a shame, you know. I'm sure when Reg Reevely was setting up Action Learning for National Union, you know, the miners in the 1950s, it was brand new, and they would have been wariness. But then once it gets used the wrong way as a power to, you know, be an advice monster as an organisation, then it's going to be tainted, isn't it? So it's such a shame that you have to then dress it up as something new. But yeah, I think if there's a genuine need, want to sort things out and improve things, then I would hope the facilitators and the coaches would be given more free rein to say, right, let us do our thing rather than work to your mandate. It's
and that takes courage.
Yeah, and it's declining work, I suppose, as well, isn't it? If you say no, this is not what we're offering here. You know, find someone else. That's potential income for someone trying to run a business or their own freelance work.
Exactly. As you've been talking, I've been noticing in myself a kind of dissonance in what you're saying. You know, you described the advice monster. There's some heavy words that have been used, and then the coaching, of course, is quite different from that, isn't it? Because there's a lightness and a trust and a depth, but a lightness. And I just wonder whether organisations see more value in the heavy because they can see it, feel it, touch it.
I think so, and I think it's interesting. I've worked with quite a lot of people who come from other organisations and sectors to work in health. They've come from city finance, banking, and supermarkets, and all sorts. And when you're having a candid cup of coffee with someone and quiet work, they often say things like, "This place is brutal. This place is really. I've never come across such so much bullying, in effect, and groupthink, and there's so much pressure, I suppose, and that comes down from the Treasury and Whitehall to say we're getting bad headlines in the Daily Mail or whatever else. This needs fixing." And you know, and I've heard stories of bosses of the NHS getting 150 chief execs from all the different trusts around the country, getting them into the room just to shout at them and berate them and say, what the hell's going on? You know, your 4-hour A&E waits are terrible. And these are really hard-working, experienced people who've been brought in from other sectors. And so they go back as if they've been kicked, and then that filters down. And that means that you want hard data. You want, as I said, it often we get lost in, we're being measured by this, so we've got to play the game to get the answers to make sure these statistics or these reports look okay so that we're not in the bottom of the table. And that's very different to how can we be the best? It's a risk averse. How do we make sure we're not, the spotlight doesn't come on us as being one of the worst? And how do we tick all the boxes? And like I said, you know, someone said, once you start measuring things, you get what you measure. Or as farmers say, you don't fatten a pig by weighing it. You know, it's very much and that is genuinely heavy. I think it's a difficult one. I think the NHS is always going to be in a very difficult place because it's a national 70-year-old thing that we can't. It's a religion, it's a cult, and it's very difficult to breach that. And when you find, I ran some action learning sets when I was chief exec with other chief execs of local medical committees, the trade association I was in, and she ran action learning sets for 6 of us who were chief execs, because I said, I don't know anyone else doing this job, grappling with the same sort of issues, and I got this action learning set. But again, it was a chief nurse who'd been persuaded that action learning was great because she'd experienced it herself because she was a chief nurse. And again, that's often where action learning starts. It's right, let's go to the board and see if we can help them, and then let's get the matrons in and see if we can help them. So it's an interesting one, but it is really hard, and I would say I'm very passionate about, and it's very, very easy to want to fix things, and previous iterations of my working life, it's been right. I'm going to be strident. I'm going to be active. I'm going to go on the radio. I'm going to go on telly. I'm going to publish this. I'm going to write that. I'm going to, and I would make people. I'd find people who I saw as heroes, ask them to mentor me, and think, right, I'm on the way to being great and doing things and fixing it all. And it doesn't work. Didn't work for me anyway. And I think I've been reading some work by a guy called Avram Alpert, and it's about he published a book called The Good Enough Life about 2 years ago.
And that's the moment where the tech failed. So Chris and I went on to talk about when he's facilitating an action learning set or doing a one-to-one. We talked about his fixing in his DNA and how he kept the fixer out of the room. And he talked a lot about different ways that he did that and described quite how many things are going on in his head when the fixer is emerging for him and he's trying to work out what to do with it. That's a lot of multitasking. And that's true for all of us, isn't it? So much is processing. I've got this piece of advice. It's a good piece of advice. I must offer it. No, you mustn't. Yes, I must. No, I mustn't. How are you not going to offer it? You just offered it. Stop it. Now, what are you going to do? All of that is a huge amount of mental processing that in that period, we're not truly listening to the other person because we're too busy. And I talked to Chris about his work as he moves forward and got his contact details, which are in the show notes. What a pleasure it was to talk to Chris. And given that a tree had fallen down his village and his broadband had gone, I think we did a really good job. But really grateful to Chris for coming to the Coaching In, and for you. What a pleasure to talk to him. And if you listened to the episode and enjoyed it, do remember to subscribe or follow. And the episode is on YouTube, where you can see the crashing out bit with the tech. Enjoy your evening, your day, your week. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, we'd love you to share the podcast with a friend or leave a comment on social media. And if you'd like to become a regular at the Coaching In, you can subscribe on Podbean and all major podcast channels. We look forward to welcoming you next time. You've been listening to The Coaching In, 3D Coaching's virtual pub. For more information, check out 3dcoaching.com.